Welcome to this chapter of my opening theory series. Today we will be looking at a game featuring the g5 variation of Fromm's Gambit. This is more formally known as the Lasker variation. In this game, I mainly look at things from White's point of view, but some of Black's ideas are discussed as well. So, in this game, the player with the white pieces is Grandmaster Lars Oskar Hauge. Apologies if I mispronounced his name. He is a young Grandmaster from Norway, and I believe that he actually became a Grandmaster in the year that this game was played. It seems that in the past he has occasionally streamed on Chess, so I will put a link to his stream in the description of this video. And with the black pieces, we have Grandmaster Suresh Shekhar Ganguly. Again, apologies if I mispronounced the player's name. And he is a Grandmaster from India who has a long career of playing in both Indian and international chess tournaments. He was also one of the seconds for the former world champion Vishy Anand. And so we kind of have a cool match between generations here. And this game was played at the Chess24 Banter Blitz Cup in 2019. It was a 3-minute game, but even though it was a blitz game, the players still played the opening very accurately. So it is definitely a game worth studying. And anyway, let's begin with the game. So if you're not aware, the Fromm's Gambit, it arises from Bird's opening. So White began the game by playing the move f4. Now f4 is a very double-edged move. It's a great choice if you're the kind of player who likes chaos on the board, if you like really dynamic positions and you don't necessarily care that much about the objective evaluation. You care more about, out-calculating your opponent and winning because you're the better player. So, Bird's opening, great choice for that. However, if you were a beginner, I would highly recommend staying away from this opening, just because you can get checkmated very quickly if you don't know what you're doing. And we're gonna see that in this game. We're gonna see how that can happen. So anyway, Black responded with the most aggressive, most challenging line for White to deal with, and that is Fromm's Gambit. That is the move e5. And this is a very confrontational move. Black is basically saying to White, hey, you've kind of weakened your king side over here. You've weakened this diagonal. So how about I open up that diagonal for my queen, and I just blast open the center and attack you. Yeah, basically what happens in this particular line in the opening is Black sacrifices a pawn and attacks White, and White tries to hold on to that pawn and use it to win the game. And so anyway, White responded with the move f takes e5. So accepting the gambit, that's usually the best choice when you're faced with a gambit. There are, of course, exceptions to that, such as with the Queen's Gambit, for example. Like the Queen's Gambit declined is a very good line. However, in this case, there is also another alternative that White could play, and that is White could have instead played the move e4, which is another good choice. And that would transpose the opening to a King's Gambit, which you normally would get from the move order e4, e5, f4. So always remember with openings, the move order doesn't matter. All that matters is the resulting position. And so anyway, White did not play the King's Gambit. White instead played the move f takes e5, which is, at least according to the engine, the best move, and it's a very good choice. But it does play into Black's attack. So black then continued with the most popular move, which is to play d6. The idea is very simple. Black is going to bait white into taking on d6 so that black can take back with the bishop, get very quick development. And if white does not take on d6, black will take the pawn on e5. And that's not so good, because basically white has severely weakened their king side, and so the free pawn is kind of the compensation for that. You don't want to kind of lose that benefit that you received from this opening. And so anyway, white played the best move, which is to take. In fact, this is really the only good move in this position. If white had instead played d4, then that runs into black taking here, and if white takes back, black trades queens, and white loses the right to castle, and then black will just attack this pawn, and then develop their queenside pieces, like develop this bishop, and then just castle queenside with check. And basically, black has a lot of piece activity, very happy pieces, whereas white's pawn structure in the center over here, these two isolated e-pawns, they are not good. One of them will most likely fall because it doesn't have neighboring pawns that can come and rush to its defense. So yeah, this is not a good line for black. So we looked at the move d4, but another possible thing you might be wondering is, well, what can white play knight f3? It's like, well, white could, but it will just kind of transpose into what happened in the game. And here, if white again tries d4, then black will again do the same idea. And the only real difference here is that here, white has the bishop pair while black doesn't. But that's still not really enough to justify going into this. Like, this is a very pleasant position for black to play simply because black has very quick development and also has some targets to attack, namely those two pawns. So, anyway, white played the best move, which is to just play e takes d6, and black, of course, took back with the bishop. And now in this position, white has to know the move to play. Like, there is really only one good move in this position, because black has a very nasty threat. If white does something really silly, like a3 or something, or knight c3 or b3 or whatever, then black will simply just play queen to h4 check, and white has only one legal move, which is to block, and then black can take this pawn. Black can also take with the queen if black's feeling particularly savage that day. White takes back, that's the only move, and here in this position, black takes the free rook. Just kidding, no, it's checkmate. And so yeah, white has to be aware of this threat after the move bishop d6. Sorry, bishop takes d6. So way back here. This is why this opening, bird's opening, is not recommended to beginners, because they could just lose as early as move 4 if they're not careful. So here in this position, white played the only good move, which is knight f3. And you might be wondering, well, what about g3? Is g3 playable? And the answer is not really, although it does take some engine analysis and stuff, but it's just unpleasant. Like, black's going to play h5 and then h4, and if, say, white develops, black comes like here, and notice that white can't really play g4 because then the bishop will take it, and basically in this line, if white ever loses the pawn back, then black is just better, so white doesn't want to do that. So if white instead plays bishop g2 to defend the rook so that white can take back on g3, black will just play h takes g3, white takes back, black takes the rook because, black's rook is under attack, white takes back, and black regains the pawn. So this is a catastrophe as far as openings go. Like, not only has white lost the ability to castle, but white loses the pawn back. So another alternative, of course, here in this position after h4 is white could try the move g takes h4, but black will simply develop, pressure this knight here, and even though white is now up 2 pawns, black's attack is just very, very strong. This position is just really unpleasant. Like these h pawns here, they're just kind of sitting ducks. They're just going to get captured in the future, and black's attack would just be overwhelming. And so anyway, none of that actually happened in the game. Instead, what happened was white played the best move, the only good move, which is knight f3, stopping the move queen h4 check. And then here, black played the most popular move, which is g5. This is known as the Lasker variation, although there are other choices for black as well. Like black could also play knight f6 or bishop g4. And so after g5 here, the move g3 is the best move, since black's idea was to attack the knight with g4, maybe force it to go away, and then move the queen in for checkmate. So white's like, okay, I will stop that. And then so black plays g4 anyway, attacking the knight. White moves the knight to h4, where it will block the h-pawn if it tries to come in. And then black's like, oh, that knight is very annoying. So black plays the move knight h7, which looks a bit silly, but we will soon see the point of it. Another move that black could consider here is the move bishop to e7. Like, this is a pretty scary move, with the idea being to take the knight, and after pawn takes, queen wins the pawn, and also it would be checkmate. So here the move knight g2 is more or less forced. Otherwise white will lose the pawn. There's no way to protect that knight. And then black could play h5, continuing this attack. And then white could play knight f4, like that's the best move. Like, this is a very scary line, but if you're gonna play bird's opening, you have to know this stuff. And then so here, bishop g2, developing the bishop, but also protecting the rook on h1 so that you can take back on g3. And then black takes on g3, white takes back. The rooks now see each other. Black takes here, white takes back. And then here, black could try queen d4, but then white's like, no, you are not getting to g1 where you would checkmate my king. And black's like, oh, fine, and moves the queen away, attacking the bishop. White plays bishop g2, black plays queen h2, and white can play king f2. And here, as crazy as this position looks, white is completely fine despite losing the right to castle. Like here, white is threatening the move queen h1, and black's attack has failed. If white can trade queens and go to the endgame up a pawn, then white is very happy. But anyway, none of this crazy stuff happened in the game. Instead, what happened, instead of the move bishop e7, which leads to that line, black played the move knight e7. And so this move looks a little strange, but there is a very good point to it. White plays the move knight c3 because white understands the point of that move. The point is black now plays knight g6, basically trying to get rid of the knight on h4 with, like a similar idea as the move bishop e7, but in this case having one more piece joining the attack. So white takes. Black takes back with the h-pawn in order to open the h-file for the rook. And now here, white plays the move knight e4, basically moving the knight to the king side with tempo, because basically if white can trade the knight for this bishop, like basically if white trades pieces, white is quite happy. The more pieces white can get off the board, the happier white will be, because basically if you can go to the endgame up a pawn, you can probably use that pawn to win the game. All else being equal, there's it's a bit more complicated than that. There's a whole bunch of things to consider, like pawn structure and piece activity and king safety and all that, but still, all else being equal, white wants to trade pieces. So black's like, no, I will not, I will not trade my bishop for your knight. I do not want that to happen. And then white just continues developing, defending the rook on h1. Another important thing to take into account is that not only did the move knight e4 attack the bishop, but it also defended the g3 square. Like if we go back a little bit to this position, black was actually threatening to play bishop takes g3 check. And then if the pawn takes the bishop, then black's rook can take white's rook. Thought that I should mention that, but anyway, white prevented that from happening. So in this position here, white's king side is starting to become a bit safer. Like white has blocked the nasty diagonal over here, and white's pieces are coming out, although white probably still does not want to castle king side. Right. But anyway, black plays the move f5, attacking the knight, and also getting another pawn into the attack. And then white plays knight f2, just bringing the knight to the king side, like closer to the king, and helping defend everything. And now here, black makes what the engine considers to be a mistake, but it's blitz. So in blitz, this move wouldn't really be considered a mistake due to how in blitz it's actually more important to have initiative than and necessarily play the most objectively correct moves. But we're going to see why this move is objectively not the best. And the reason why is because black needed to play the move c5 in order to, take some central space, like fight for the center, fight for all these squares over here. But anyway, black played knight c3, and here white plays the move c3 because white wants to now play d4 and get the dark squared bishop developed. And then, since it's a blitz game, black decides to go all in with their attack. So the engine considers this move to be a blunder, and it is because this attack sadly doesn't work, and we will now see why. So white plays d4, counter-attacking in the center. Like that's actually a very popularly stated principle in chess, is that if your opponent attacks on the flank, you should respond with a counterattack in the center. And so anyway, the stuff on the king side looks really scary, but as we will now see, it doesn't really work out. So black takes, white takes, and now it looks like black could play the move bishop takes g3, but that's actually a terrible move because, again, remember the h-file, remember what's happening over there. So instead, black has to play the move rook takes h1 check. That move is more or less forced. And then white takes back with the knight in order to defend the pawn on g3. And then black there realizes that their bishop is under attack. So they have to move back. Like they have to spend more time just moving this bishop. Like in chess, the tempo is very critical, especially for attacking players. Like especially when you are attacking. Like time spent like moving this bishop a lot of times really does help white bring their defenses together. So anyway, white plays the move queen d3, which is again another move with tempo. Not only does it get the queen out, but it also attacks a pawn, so black has to react to that somehow. Black also develops their queen with the move queen f6, defending the pawn. And now here in this position, white makes a slight inaccuracy with the move e4. Now, even though the engine says that this move is a blunder, that's not really true. Like, white's position is still winning. Although this move, it does kind of betray certain principles. Like, the most important thing for white to deal with here is king safety. Like, what white needs to do is just castle, like castle queenside. Right, so a move like bishop d2 or bishop e3 is probably what I personally would play in this position, but then again, I generally suck at 3-minute blitz, so I probably, who knows, maybe I probably would have played e4 too or something, or I probably would have blundered everything. I would have played queen takes g6, yeah, that's what I would do. Anyway, now here, one thing that is interesting and is sort of worth mentioning is what the engine says is the actual best move, which is the move knight f2. And this move actually does have a few interesting ideas. Like, basically, this bishop, the dark squared bishop, it only really has the squares d2 or e3 to go to, but those squares, they kind of stink as far as squares go. So, what this move, knight f2, the part of the idea behind it is that it can come to e4, and then white could bring their bishop out to maybe g5 or maybe even f4, depending on where things land, depending on if this bishop moves away so that white can grab the f4 square, stuff like that. So knight f2 is kind of interesting, but it's not really a move you would need to memorize or anything like that. Like, what white did in the game is perfectly fine. So back in this position, white played the move e4, which, even though the engine says is a blunder, doesn't actually change the fact that white has a winning position. And so, anyway, black realizes that their attack, it's kind of over. They can't really continue it. So black responds with bishop d7, just trying to castle. And then white continues with the move bishop e3, which is now a bit better because the e-pawn is not sitting on e2, because otherwise the bishop would be in the pawn's way. Black castles, white castles, and now here in this position, white is up a pawn and has no problems. So in other words, white is just winning. Like, white is completely playing for a win here, and black is likely playing for a draw, although it is blitz, and anything can happen in blitz. It's not only that, but we see that white has very, very strong control of the center, whereas black's pawns over here, they kind of stink. They're very easy to attack, and very hard to defend. They're just waiting to be picked off at some point. And so anyway, in this position, black plays the move bishop e6, trying to maybe create weaknesses on white's queen side since the pawn on a2 is being attacked. And white plays the move king b1, which, even though the engine thinks is a bit inaccurate, you'll notice that even though white can play push one of these pawns here and fork, all these things, win material that way, those threats aren't really going anywhere. Like, if black moves any of these pieces, white can still just push the other pawn and fork things. So the move king b1 is actually very sensible. White is basically saying, I do not want to allow you any counterplay. I am just going to win this game very cleanly. I don't care if I mate you in 20 moves or 200 moves. I just want to make sure I win. And so anyway, black plays the move queen f7, adding another attacker to the a2 square. And white simultaneously forks black's pieces and also blocks the attack on a2. And then black plays for some tricks, plays bishop e5. We'll notice that the pawn on d5 is kind of pinned, and even though d takes e6 would attack black's queen, black can still, take white's queen, and after this, it's actually black who would now be playing for a win. Like, after here, black just goes back and deals with the pawn on f7 that's, trying to promote. White could play bishop h6, but black can just defend the promotion square and eventually win this pawn. So yeah, that did not happen in the game, but it is important to look for resources like that. Like, when you are losing a game, never give up. Don't give up until after the game is over. Then you can give up at that point. So back in this position, white did not play the move d takes e6. White instead just moved their queen off of the file. Notice that the fork is still in play. And so black plays for some more tricks. And here the idea is kind of similar. If white plays here, black will just take the rook, white takes back, and now, black has actually again won some material. And here the position is actually kind of better for black than before because the pawn is now still only on e6 as opposed to on f7. So anyway, white did not play d takes e6. White stayed patient and just played rook d2. Notice now that the rook is defended twice by both the bishop and the queen. And black's like, okay, alright, I'll just move my bishop back. And then white takes the knight, black takes the pawn. But it looks like white sees a way to win even more material. So white plays queen takes g4 check, and black plays bishop e6. And white has a nice little sequence here. White just takes the rook, black takes back, those moves are forced, and now white forks the king and bishop, and black plays king d7. And now in this position, white is just up 2 pieces. And the pawn, but mainly the pieces. Like, white is just completely winning at this point. And the rest of the moves of the game aren't really that interesting, but we'll go through them quickly. So black plays queen a6, attacking the pawn on a2. White gives a check. Black moves the king away. White blocks the attack on a2. Black goes and attacks white's stuff. White defends their stuff. Black does not want to trade queens. If black trades queens, white wins. So white's just going to get their pieces into the game. And black attacks white's pawn because what else can black really do here? And oh yeah, move that a bit fast. So white plays bishop f4, just defending the pawn, putting the bishop onto a square where it's defended so that, if the queen attacks the bishop, it's not a problem. Black moves their queen again because there isn't really much black can do. Ooh, white gets their king off a more vulnerable diagonal, like basically this diagonal where it could be potentially attacked. It's actually kind of harder to attack the king when he's on b2, so that's why white played that move. Black plays b5, trying to get some pawns into a queenside attack or something, even though that's pretty silly because black does not have enough pieces to attack white. That's the sad fact of this position. White brings more pieces into the game. Black moves their queen back out of the way of the a5 pawn. White attacks. Black plays queen to c6. I suppose those, let's see, were there any tricks here? I don't think so. White could probably play bishop takes a7, but I don't know, it's blitz. This was probably just the chaos of blitz here. Anyway, bishop d4. Black pushes the a-pawn. White pushes the e-pawn with a discovered attack on the queen. Black moves their queen. White forks the queen and bishop. White is now going to trade. So black plays queen e7. White trades, which is good for white. Generally, when you're winning, you want to trade pieces, and when you're losing, you want to trade pawns, because when there are less pieces on the board, your extra piece will really be felt. Well, it's because, you're like, it's kind of like the question of which is easier to win, a hockey game where it's 2-on-1 or a hockey game where it's 5 players against 4. It's similar idea as there. Or like you really feel the extra player when it's 2-on-1 sort of thing. And when it comes to the pawns, like if black can somehow trade the pawns, then that makes it more likely to get a perpetual with the queen. And in other situations, it makes it harder to promote a pawn if there are less pawns on the board. Anyway, white plays queen d3, black plays c6, bishop e4, or black moves their g-pawn because it was under attack. Bishop comes here, king runs away, bishop goes to f5. This move is considered an inaccuracy because white could actually force mate in 11, but how on earth are you going to see that in a 3-minute blitz game? You're not, so not really an inaccuracy. But anyway, black moves their queen, white moves their pawn, black blocks the pawn, white solidifies the bishop on f5. It it now frees up white's queen, which can move elsewhere. It doesn't have to stay and defend this bishop. Black wins connect 3. White drops their bishop back and tries to trade queens. Black runs away. White tries to trade queens again. Black runs away. Hey, white takes the pawn on g5. And white is now going to force checkmate. Like, it's kind of hard to see, you know, the forced checkmate so quickly, but, you know, it actually kind of becomes intuitive just to find all these moves, like, very quickly and stuff. And, yeah, the game is over. Black is now checkmated. And, yeah, that concludes this game. Hopefully you enjoyed it. The most important parts of the game to remember are, of course, just the parts at the beginning. So all the way back here, just the opening. Understanding the threats of queen h4 check, and that knight f3 is the only good move here. g3 is not really a good alternative. Black is just too strong against g3. So this is the g5 variation. Black actually does have other choices. And yeah, I would say up until this point is probably worth memorizing, although it is cool to see that the f4 attack does not work. Anyway, I hope you liked what you saw, and as usual, if you liked what you saw, feel free to subscribe to my channel. That'll do for this video. Thank you, and goodbye.